Welcome to Top 10 Talmud, Part 4. Today, we're going to study together Tractate Bava Metzia, page 62a. The Talmud says, Shnayim shehayu mehalchin baderech, two people walking along the way. Ubiyad echad mehem kiton shel mayim, and one of them owned and held a jug of water. Im shosim shnehem, if both of them drink the water, let's say they're walking in the desert, and both drank this bit of water, mesim, they'll both die. V'im shosa echad behem, and if one of them drank the water, the one who owned the water, who owned the canteen of water, he drank the water himself, magia liyishuv, he will arrive alive, and he will come to the settlement and survive. But this other person who did not own the water, if he does not give him to drink, he will die. What should you do? What's the halacha? Should you share the water and both die? Or should the person who owns the water keep it himself? This is a machlokes in the Gemara. This is an argument in the Talmud, and the two protagonists are Ben Petura and Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, Darash Ben Petura says, Mutav sheishtu shnehem v'yamusu, it's better that they both should drink the water and both die. V'al yireh echad mehem b'misaso shel chavero, and one should not see and witness the death of his friend. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva v'limed, until Rabbi Akiva came along and paskind, he decided the halacha, the law, as follows. Based on the verse in the Torah, V'chei achicha imach, your brother shall live with you, chayecha kodmin l'chayei chavercha. Since the Torah says, V'chei achicha imach, that your neighbor shall live with you, that you take precedence, he lives with you, meaning you are the person who has the water, and he should live with you. That means, says Rabbi Akiva, chayecha kodmin l'chayei chavercha. Your life takes precedence over your neighbor's life, and therefore you own the jug of water, and therefore you take precedence. If they both owned the water, Rabbi Akiva would agree that they both have to drink the water, and they both will die. And this is how we paskin the halacha, that if a person owns the water, he owns a canteen of water, and his friend does not have enough water to drink and he will not survive, the person who owns the water can drink the water himself and survive, and he will not have to give that water or share the water with his neighbor. Now, to understand the context, let's look at a contemporary commentary. This is the Sefer Igrot Moshe from the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who died in 1986, and he was the great posek, the great decisor of Jewish law in modern times. And of course, there are other decisors today, but when he was alive, he was the Gadol Hador, the leader of the generation, and he wrote responsa in many volumes called Sefer Igrot Moshe. And he comments on this Talmudic passage. And in Yoreh, Chelek Aleph, in Yoreh, section 1, responsum number 145, he explains the following. Let's look at this argument in context. The first concept is the law of Yeharag ve'al Ya'avor. A person must die and not violate a commandment. What are those situations? If you have Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z. Mr. X says to Mr. Y, you must kill Mr. Z. And if you don't kill Mr. Z, Mr. X says, I will kill you. So what does Mr. Y have to do? He has to allow himself to be killed because he cannot proactively kill Mr. Z, because who says that my blood is redder than his blood? And therefore, if Mr. X requires me to kill that person or I will be killed, I have to allow myself, Mr. Y has to allow himself to be killed and not kill Mr. Z. If Mr. X says to Mr. Y, you must rape Mrs. Z or I will kill you, then Mr. Y has to allow himself to be killed and not commit that offense. That's Yeharag ve'al Ya'avor. He must allow himself to die and not commit the offense upon Mrs. Z, because who says my blood is redder than her blood? And the third scenario, if Mr. X says to Mr. Y in front of 10 other Jews, Mr. Y, you must bow down to this idol or I will kill you, then Mr. Y has to allow himself to be killed and not to commit idol worship in public. Those are the three scenarios called Yeherag Vayavor, where the Mr. Y has to allow himself to die and not commit the offense. That's level 1, says Rav Moshe Feinstein. Level 2. Imagine this next scenario. You have Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z. Mr. X comes to Mr. Y and says, your friend Mr. Z is at the bottom of the pit. There's a big pit here and a ladder going down. Mr. X comes to Mr. Y and says, you must remove the ladder from the pit and allow Mr. Z to die in the pit and not have a way of escaping. And if you don't remove the ladder, then Mr. Y, I will kill you. So what is the law? The law is that Mr. Y is not allowed to remove the ladder. Now, this is different than scenario number 1, where I am doing a proactive act on Mr. Z or Mrs. Z, and I'm causing their death. Here, I'm not doing a proactive act by hurting Mr. Z. I'm just removing the possibility that he could survive. In that case, I am not allowed. It's still a law where I am not allowed to cause, even by omission, called grama. I'm not allowed to, by omission, remove the possibility that he could save himself. I'm not doing a proactive act to kill Mr. Z, but I'm causing him by an act of omission of removing the ladder, not allowing him to have an opportunity to escape. Therefore, that is also not allowed, and therefore I must allow myself to be killed by Mr. X and not remove the ladder. That's the second scenario. Now we come to our case in the Talmud in Bava Metzia, page 62a. Mr. Y owns a jug of water. Mr. Z does not own the jug of water. Mr. Y is walking along and he has enough water to make it to the next settlement, and it's going to take him 24 hours to get there. If he sips the water a little bit at a time, he will arrive there. But if he shares the water with Mr. Z, and there's not enough water for both of them to survive 24 hours, then both will die and neither will arrive at the next settlement, and therefore they will both die. The law of charity requires Mr. Y to share his water with Mr. Z. Even though they're both going to survive only for 2 or 3 hours, nevertheless, the law of tzedakah, of charity, requires Mr. Y to share his water with Mr. Z. Now that is a law of charity which takes precedence over the fact that I own the water. Charity takes precedence over ownership. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and says, because of a verse in the Torah which says, V'chei achicha imach, he must live with you, meaning you take precedence, and he must live with you. If you have water, and you have enough water to share with him, and you both could survive, then the law of charity takes precedence, and you could share the water with him, and you both survive. Meaning if you have enough water for both of you, then the charity takes over, and you have to give the water and share the water, and you can both survive. That's the law of charity. According to Rabbi Akiva, the law of charity, of tzedakah, applies only when Mr. Y has enough water for himself and his neighbor, and they can both survive to the next level. Or Mr. Y has enough water for himself and a little bit of water for Mr. Z that he can survive for 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours. He must give that water and share that water with Mr. Z, even though Mr. Z is going to die after 5 hours. But that's only if Mr. Y has enough water for himself to survive. But if Mr. Y does not have enough water to share with the other person, then because of the principle of V'chei achicha imach, he must live with you and you must take precedence over him. Therefore, I have no obligation of charity to give to Mr. Z because I don't have enough water for myself. And therefore, the law says, according to Rabbi Akiva, that Mr. Y owns the water, and the law of charity does not apply because the pasuk, the verse says, V'chei achicha imach, that you're allowed to drink the water for yourself. And even though, unfortunately, Mr. Z will die, I am allowed to keep the water for myself to arrive at the settlement because that is the law. Now that we have read the Gemara and understood the scenarios of the Gemara and understood the two positions of Ben Petura and Rabbi Akiva, now let's begin to learn Gemara. Learning Gemara means that we understand the svara, the mindset of Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petura. In this way, you and I can join with the minds of Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petura. We could, as if we are sitting in the Beis Medrash, in the study hall with them, trying to understand their thinking process. This is how we really learn Gemara. This is the critical thinking. This is called lamdus, where you analyze the Gemara, you investigate the Gemara, you add your mind to the Gemara's thinking. And this is how you can participate, and we can participate in the transmission of the oral law. When we try to understand the mindset of our sages, Chazal, and the Tanaim of the Mishnah and the Gemara, and we try to understand how they apply the 13 principles of Talmudic interpretation in order to understand what is God's will, then we enter into the spirituality of the Gemara. We understand the soul of the Gemara. What we're trying to understand here is, what is God's will about the priorities of life? We learn the verses of the Torah as interpreted by the Talmud, as interpreted by the Talmudic interpretations, the 13 Talmudic interpretations as brought down by our sages and how they understand them. Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petura are two of them. And now we join our minds with them to understand their mindset. What were they thinking when they were arguing in the Gemara? When we do that, we are joining our soul with their soul. We're sitting down with Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petura in their Beis Medrash, and we're arguing with them. This is how we can transcend generations. We can travel back 1800 years and understand that this is the process of Jewish law and that you and I are part of that process. Now let's learn together. Let's learn Be'iyun. Let's have lamdus. Let's have investigation and critical thinking. What is the mindset of Ben Petura, who says that if I own the water, the canteen of water, I am not allowed to drink it myself. Rather, I have to share it with my neighbor. And even though we're both going to die, I have to do that. What is the mindset of Ben Petura? He says that that is akin to murder. Going back to our original scenario of Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z. And Mr. X says to Mr. Y, if you don't kill Mr. Z, I'm going to kill you. X is going to kill Y. Then Y is required by Jewish law to give up his life and not kill Z and allow himself to be killed by X in order not to be guilty of murder. And that's called Yeharag v'yal ya'avor. He shall allow himself to be Yeharag, to be killed, and not to be over, not to violate the mitzvah of not murdering. So Ben Petura applying that scenario to our case of Mr. Y owning water and Mr. Z not having any water, according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, he tells us that the thinking of Ben Petura is this, that the lack of water is just like Mr. X. Just like Mr. X says to Mr. Y, I'm going to kill you unless you kill Z, so too the thirst is coming to Mr. Y and saying, if you don't share that water with somebody else, you're both going to die. And therefore, according to Ben Petura, the scenario of the water owned by Mr. Y and Mr. Z does not have water, that's exactly like the situation of Mr. X telling to Mr. Y, you must kill Mr. Z. It's the thirst which is going to kill Mr. Y and Mr. Z, and therefore Mr. Y is not allowed to keep the water for himself. Why? Because the law of tzedakah, of charity, that he must take care of his neighbor, takes precedence over the water that he owns. Doesn't matter that he owns the water. It's that the thirst comes along and is threatening both of them, and they're both required to live. And therefore the lack of water is like a threat to Mr. Y, and Mr. Y therefore is not allowed to keep the water for himself. He must share the water. But they're both going to die. So Ben Petura says, it doesn't matter. It's better than they both die than Mr. Y murder Mr. Z by drinking the water himself. In other words, if Mr. Y drinks the water himself, even though he owns it, and he has an obligation to give tzedakah to Mr. Z, he is murdering Mr. Z by drinking the water himself. And according to Ben Petura, it applies also in the second scenario, where Mr. Z is in the bottom of a pit, and Mr. Y has a ladder at the top of the pit, and Mr. X says to Mr. Y, remove the ladder or I'm going to kill you. Is Mr. Y allowed to remove the ladder to save himself? According to Ben Petura, the X, the man who's requiring it, is thirst. Thirst comes along and says, you are both going to die. Therefore, if you drink the water, you are killing Mr. Z. Even though it's not an act of causation where you're actually murdering Mr. Z, nevertheless, if you remove the ladder, you are taking away the opportunity for Mr. Z to live. Then according to Ben Petura, Mr. Y is not allowed to drink the water. Because if he drinks the water, he's removing the ladder. He's removing the opportunity for Mr. Z to save himself. Therefore, at most, they're both allowed to drink water. They're both going to survive for 2 or 3 hours, but they're both eventually going to die if they don't get water in 24 hours. That's the thinking of Ben Petura. Now comes along Rabbi Akiva and says the following. With pure logic, you would be right. However, we have a verse. The verse is V'chei achicha imach. That's the original Gemara. You can see it here on your screen. It says in the Torah, V'chei achicha imach. It's God's mind. It's God's will that it means V'chei achicha imach. Your brother shall live with you. Which means if you own the water, if Mr. Y owns the water, then if he does not give the water to Mr. Z, because he owns the water, Mr. Y owns the water, the thirst is not acting like Mr. X saying to Mr. Y, if you don't share your water with Mr. Z, you are a murderer. No, because the verse of the Torah tells us God's mind, God's will in the Torah when he says, V'chei achicha imach, that your brother shall live with you, means that you come first. If you own the water, if the hashgacha pratis, if the divine providence is such that I own the water, Mr. Y owns the water, then he does not have to give the water to Mr. Z and share it with him, because then they'll both die. And therefore, because of a verse in the Torah, which is God's will, God's mind, therefore, Rabbi Akiva comes and interprets and says that therefore that's not the same case. He disagrees with Ben Petura. According to Rabbi Akiva, the verse comes to tell Mr. Y that he can drink the water himself, and if he does so, he is not a murderer. And that is the halacha. The halacha is like that if you own the water yourself, then it is not considered murder not to share the water with Mr. Y. And that is the pilpul, that is the lamdus, that is the deeper understanding of this Gemara. When you and I are trying to understand the mindset of Ben Petura and the mindset of Rabbi Akiva, to understand what is God's mind, what is God's will, then we are joining into the process of oral law. This gives us an opportunity, a spirituality to connect with our sages, to connect our minds with their mind, and collectively our mind is connecting with God's mind. Now that's spirituality, that's Gemara, that's Talmud. Let's keep learning together. Stay tuned for Top 10 Talmud number 5.